Counting netting. Counting is a necessary part of netting. You need to count rows, loops, and knots. To count along a row of netting, let's begin by looking at a row, the first row. It is possible to count either the knots or the loops. Both ways work. Let's count the knots on this row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now let's count the loops on the same row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sometimes, as you can see, there are more knots than loops. The first row will always have one more knot than it has loops because of the initial knot tied to the foundation loop. See? Here is the initial knot tied to the foundation loop. You can also count loops when they are not on the mesh stick. It's harder to count the knots when the netting is not on the mesh stick, so I usually just count the loops. See, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The second row is slightly different than the first row of diamond mesh netting. Let's count the knots on this row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Notice that there are just 6, not 7 knots on this row. Now let's count the loops on the same row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Still 6 loops. Now let's count the loops when they're not on the mesh stick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In plain diamond mesh netting, all other rows will be like the second row, with the same number of knots and loops in each row. To count rows. The easiest way to count rows of netting is to do it when many loops are still on the mesh stick. Gently pull against the tension device and count either the rows of knots or the rows of loops, not both. If counting the rows of knots, remember to count the row of knots into the foundation loop. If counting the rows of loops, remember to count the row of loops still on the mesh stick. Let's count the rows of knots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Now let's count the rows of loops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. To count the number of rows after the mesh stick is removed from the netting, you need to count the knots either diagonally or in a zigzag pattern. Using the same sample as above, but without the mesh stick, let's count the number of rows. If you want to count diagonally, start at the top row of netting in one corner and count to the bottom row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. The zigs and zags can be long, short, or varied when counting in a zigzag pattern. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.